When one is asked to give an explanation or a synopsis to a movie or a series, it is the plot that is often focused, for the plot is the basic foundation of the story, and the viewers are often taken through this story to determine what the outcome is. However, for Girls' Last Tour, it is really not the plot or even the outcome that is the focus of the story. It is true that we are all interested in seeing how Chi and Yu will survive at the very end, but the majority of the story is not based upon how they get to the end, but what they experience during their journey. And as such, the experiences that these characters receive become far more important than the plot of the actual story. So what's up, people, and welcome to another episode of Girls' Last Tour. In this episode, we talk about episode 10 of the series. And from what I find out, this episode becomes especially true with regards to the experiences that these girls have rather than the plot of the story itself. If one looked at the plot of the story itself, one will receive very little from this actual episode. And because of that, for me, it took me several viewings to figure out exactly what was the purpose of this episode. But once one focuses not on the actual purpose and the plot, but rather on the experience and the feelings that one gets from each one of these episodes, then one starts understanding why episode 10 was brought out this way. For if one looks at the plot, the episode is relatively shallow. The girls ride on a train, the girls go up on an elevator, and the girls finally take a break outside in the city. And that is all that happens in episode 10, and based upon that, the plot is relatively trivial. But the important thing is not, again, what happens in the story, but more so what is experienced in the story. And when one goes through that, the viewers themselves start experiencing many interpretations from this specific episode. And I feel that based upon whoever you are, the interpretations that you may get from this episode may be different. But it is these experiences that make up the overwhelming content of Girls' Last Tour, and episode 10 is no different. So episode 10 starts out where Chi and Yu board a train, and we are greeted to them waiting for this train to arrive at this gloomy train station. And once it does arrive, we find out that the train is a relatively ominous looking train. And so the question that comes up is, why is there such an ominous feeling towards this train? And this arrival alone of this ominous train starts giving you some idea of what sort of world this was. Because from what it seems like, everything in this world has lost its color. There was nothing in the world that really felt warm and alive. Everything felt like it was only developed for a practical purpose, and the esoteric nature of the surrounding was completely thrown out. And the question is, why is that? Why would the world forget what is necessary to make their environment feel so good and go completely into the practical? And so it does create some interpretations of what you might consider the world was like prior to this devastation. And it seems to indicate that the world slowly deteriorated into this post-apocalyptic situation, and through it all, the survival of the community became the all-important situation, and things such as feeling and esoterics became non-important. Everything was done for the sake of the practical. It may have been an act of desperation. It may have been a choice that this community has made. But for whatever situation, the feelings of warmth were lost. And that gives a reflection to the community that has created this world. What were the people like that created this situation that resulted in this post-apocalyptic mess. And if there is no feeling towards esoterics or the warmth, then the personality of the people who created them may have been extremely cold. And you get that from the symbolism that you see throughout this entire series, but I really didn't notice it as much until I saw it with this train. The other places looked industrial, but at least it felt like maybe it was due to the post-apocalyptic mess that it deteriorated into that. But with this train, which seemed to be still fully functional, this dark, gloomy nature seemed to indicate that that's how the people of the world created this world at the very end. And now Chi and Yu were traveling through it and feeling the consequences of what the community created. Now, this part of the story is relatively straightforward. Chi and Yu go through some interesting small talk that really doesn't fall into anything with the exception of Chi being Chi again and Yu being Yu, and you get that comical conversations that you have often seen in the past. And the one key point that they do talk about is where they want to eventually disembark. And although they could stop at any one of the stations, they feel that eventually their time is going to run out due to the limited resources that they have. And so if that is the case, they might as well take this train to the very last station because they just don't have the time to explore every single station. And the feeling that you get from that is the slowly creeping desperation that these two girls have because of the dwindling resources that they currently have. But despite all of that, Yu remains Yu and Chi remains Chi, and considering the fact that they had to go through so much hardship to get where they are, it doesn't seem to faze them to continue to go on. And the train eventually does stop at the final station, and they do get off. And it's at this point that we come to the second part of the story, which involves a radio that Yu took from that gravesite several episodes back. Although she told Yu to return it to the grave, she never did because she thought that it might turn out to be quite useful. Well, during this part of the story, a small sound comes through in the radio. And of course, this opens up a conversation on what exactly a radio is. And eventually, they talk about the sound that they hear. And it's an unfamiliar sound, but it's a sound that produces emotion in both of them. And through their analysis of the sound, they realize that it is most likely what they call music. Now, Yu really doesn't know what music is, but considering the fact that she is the one that sings all the time, she immediately understands what music is once Chi explains it to her. And as they continue to go through the story, they're trying to see if they could get that signal back. And when they find the elevator, they decide to take it so that they can go to the surface. And once they get to the surface, the radio eventually kicks in with the full music. And it is not a happy tone. It's a very melancholy tone. And the scene that they see outside during that time turns out to be a sunset. And because they're not familiar with what music is in general, they're not really sure how to control the emotions that they receive listening to the song. And she eventually starts crying, and she doesn't really know why. But due to the melancholy nature of the music and the scene of the sunset that they see, she at least feels emotionally sad, and it takes the happy-go-lucky nature of Yu to bring her back again. Once again, this may be symbolism of the desperation that they're going through. This may be the feeling of loneliness that they had coming through. One can interpret many things. But throughout this entire episode, there is this melancholy tone to everything, whether it's the appearance of the train, the situations that they fall through, or the music that you hear. And considering Girls' Last Tour is about a post-apocalyptic survival scene, this situation and this music may be the most appropriate for this episode. Now, everything is not dark and gloomy, as we find out in part 3, as they decide to take a rest in an open area. It starts out quite gloomy because of the fact that where they take a rest is a completely destroyed area full of war machines. And both Chi and Yu are wondering exactly what might have happened here, but they can only guess what could have been based upon the destruction that they see. But why I say it's a more uplifting part of the story is because eventually Yu finds a living creature nearby. Now I say creature because I don't exactly know what it is. And of course they don't know what it is either, and their guess is that it may be a cat. Now, luckily we know what cats look like, and this definitely doesn't look like a cat. But it is a pretty cute creature, and it does give a happy tone to this otherwise dismal episode. And so if we were going to go with the plot, the one thing that everybody might talk about is that Chi and Yu found another living creature and thought it was a cat. And that gives kind of a humor tone to this entire episode. But my feeling is once again, this isn't about the plot, nor is it about the conclusion of the outcome of this episode. It is more about the travels and the experiences that they have. So this discovery of an animal turns out to be a positive note for them, and it somehow gets them over the difficult parts that they had in the previous parts of the episode. It may turn out to be just another day in their travels, but as their travels become so important to them, the experiences that they receive during the travels, both the good parts and the bad become memorable to this entire story. If this was any other story where there was a true strong plot and the objective of getting to the end was the important factor of the story, then one might criticize this episode as being a completely useless episode. However, with Girls' Last Tour, since one of the most important things is not where you will be at the end, but what you experience during your travels, what you find throughout this episode turns out to be quite interesting despite the shallow nature of its plot. And as such, episode 10 becomes yet another important experience to them. It's not an all-around positive experience, but overall they are still getting over many of the obstacles, and you could see those two characters, despite everything that is thrown at them, continue to move forward in the efforts to survive. And so it'll be interesting to see how this moves forward. Now the cat, or the animal that they think is a cat, decided to follow them, so it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future. Will you end up eating it? We're not exactly sure. It does open up a question. If this cat was alive, how did it stay alive if there are no resources around it? Maybe they should have searched around to see how this cat survived, and maybe they could have found a food source. I don't know. And to be honest, logical explanations are not the point of the story. The look and feel and the emotional experience is the important thing. And so if you dwell upon stuff like that too long, you may start losing the whole purpose of the story. So let's continue to follow Chi and Yu and find out what will happen in the future travels. And if the cat decides to tag along, maybe we will have a third character in this story. But in any case, that is the episode 10 discussion for Girls' Last Tour. I will continue to watch the final 2 episodes. And when I do, I will upload the videos, and I hope you join me at that time. But thank you very much for listening. And until the next episode, happy anime watching. And as always, Jaya, nice day, everyone.